And we have more breaking news. Major rulings from the Supreme Court on the final day of its term. The justices today allowed birthright citizenship to stand and ruled against transgender athletes. These landmark decisions have wider implications. We have live team coverage, and our reporters are getting reaction on the rulings. Let's begin with Conan Nolan. He's in studio, joining us to talk about this. You know, some losses for the Trump administration, but I want to begin with birthright citizenship. Are you at all surprised?
Not a surprise. Big loss. Yeah. Big loss for the administration. So it all boils down to the 14th Amendment, which says all persons born or naturalized in the United States, subject to the jurisdiction therein, that's a key phrase, are citizens of the United States and of the state in which they reside. So that's from a case from San Francisco from over 125 years ago. Now, what's important about this case are two things. Not only is this in the Constitution, but it was Congress years ago put it in law. They codified it in law. Doesn't mean as much as the Constitution, but it's important. The Supreme Court could have said to Donald Trump, when you signed an executive order and you got rid of it, can't do that. You can't just by your signature get rid of a law. They could have just kept it at that. In fact, there was a 6-3 ruling against that, saying that his executive order doesn't work. It's null and void. But the Chief Justice, John Roberts, and Amy Coney Barrett, clearly, they wanted to go directly to the Constitution. There's too much wiggle room when you talk about Congress and law, and we want to go directly to the Constitution. And they're the ones who said, no, it's clear. It's been adjudicated by the Supreme Court many times in the past. This is what the Constitution says. If you're born here, you're a citizen here, and that's it. And Congress can change whatever law they want. It's in the Constitution, and that was a 5-4 decision. It was a lot closer than a lot of people thought. Absolutely. But by taking it on, going directly to the Constitution, they sent a message to the White House: don't screw with this.
Okay, something else that's very, that was highly looked at for many months was the transgender ban. So that was upheld, but there's a nuance to that. And I also want to talk about the voting here.
Right. So the court essentially said the challenge was from trans athletes who said that the states of Idaho and West Virginia had bans on them participating in girls' sports, that violated the 14th Amendment of the Constitution, the Equal Protection Clause, and that it also violated Title IX from 1972, which equated boys' sports with girls' sports, and that it penalized them. Now, the court essentially said, you know, it's up to states, that these laws are not against the Constitution. They do not violate the 14th Amendment. That was a 6-3 ruling. And by a 9-0 ruling, they said it also doesn't violate Title IX. So you even had the liberal members of the court defending Title IX and what it's meant for women's sports. So it was a loss for them. But in the state of California, trans athletes can compete. Doesn't change that.
Here in California, but I'm assuming at some point, I mean, if these students continue their career, how could that impact them?
Well, at some point, somebody's going to challenge it. At some point, there's going to be a young woman who says, I was denied a scholarship that I would have gotten from a university, but it's because of a trans athlete beat me in the high jump or whatever, and that they've been harmed by this. They will challenge it. Will it make it up to the Supreme Court? I don't know. But right now, based on this, it's up to the states, and it's not a violation of the Constitution at this point if indeed you allow trans participation in sports, as the state of California does.
I want to talk about the campaign finance rule. So President Donald Trump earlier mentioned that this was a victory for his administration.
It was the one victory he got today, where essentially there was a rule that kept political parties from coordinating or spending a lot of money, or past a certain amount, on particular candidates. It was designed to not allow big donors hide their contributions by giving a ton of money to a party, and then the party gives a ton of money to J.D. Vance, and J.D. Vance actually was a plaintiff in this case. So the Supreme Court said, yeah, it's a First Amendment issue. If a political party wants to spend money on a candidate, there's no limit. Now, the minority said, listen, you've just opened up a can of worms, because that's what's going to happen. You're going to have people who don't want you're a billionaire. You don't want people to know that you're contributing, so you give to the party. And that party then sort of not surreptitious, but gives to the candidate. It's a way around campaign finance laws that have been that have been upheld. So, yeah, the Republican Party is the one that brought this case. They got the victory, but it's the only one for the administration today.
Isn't that something? All right, Conan, Nolan, as always, thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us. It's always so great. All right, and our team coverage continues with NBC4's Keenan Willard. He's live in Westlake with reaction to the Supreme Court's decision on birthright citizenship. Keenan, that's a big immigrant community there. How are people feeling about this decision today?
Certainly a big immigrant community here in this part of Southern California and sending shockwaves across the country. Right in the last hour, we heard from the Coalition for Humane Immigrant Rights, CHIRLA. They held a press conference here in Westlake with multiple other immigrant rights groups, all of them celebrating what they say is a landmark victory for immigrant rights communities, or the immigrant community here in Southern California, to uphold the right of birthright citizenship. What the message that we heard was unanimous across the board from these advocates, saying that for any child born in this country on American soil, that today's ruling upholds the fact that citizenship is a right, not a privilege, that can be withheld from them. Now, they say these efforts to potentially remove birthright citizenship were a great source of concern for people living and working in Southern California, and that today's decision helps to reaffirm their rights. They say in diverse communities like here in Southern California, this Supreme Court decision will set up children of immigrants to become future leaders and lift up their neighborhoods.
They are America's next teachers, nurses, entrepreneurs, scientists, artists, military service members, public servants, and community leaders. They are the people who will care for our families, strengthen our economy, enrich our democracy, and help us write America's next chapter.
Now, these immigrant rights groups also telling us that, in their view, the job's not done to support immigrant families. They say that this should never have been a split decision, 5-4 by the U.S. Supreme Court today. They don't believe that birthright citizenship should ever have come to be a debate in this country, and that more work needs to be done to uplift immigrants living and working in communities like Southern California. For the moment, from Westlake, Keenan Willard, NBC4 News.
All right, Keenan, thank you so much for that. The U.S. Supreme Court has issued its final landmark decisions for the 2025-2026 term. The justices upheld states' ban on transgender athletes and girls' sports, upheld birthright citizenship, and struck down a long-standing campaign finance restriction rule. In a 6-3 decision, the Supreme Court ruled that states can continue enforcing laws that ban transgender athletes from competing in girls' and women's school sports. NBC4's John Cadiz-Climac joins us live in the newsroom to break down today's decisions. John.
The court's conservative majority upheld state laws that ban transgender athletes from competing in girls' and women's school and college sports. The court ruled that the bans did not violate either the Constitution's Equal Protections Clause or Title IX protections against sex discrimination in education. Outside the walls of the U.S. Supreme Court today, a group gathered to celebrate the 6-3 decision, largely along ideological lines that states themselves can decide how they handle transgender students in youth sports cases. Transgender students in West Virginia and Idaho had challenged their state's bans, and lower courts allowed them to keep playing while the appeals played out. For supporters of today's ruling, they say the court recognized the unique dignity of women and young girls.
And we are thrilled. We've worked on this issue for over 8 years and brought it to the forefront because we had moms calling our office complaining about their daughters losing scholarships and losing their places on sports teams.
Important to note, this may not have any effect here in California, where state law requires public schools to allow students to participate on sports teams that align with their gender identity. Today's ruling in Washington doesn't change that, but it does allow other states which ban the practice to continue to do so. It's activated the LA LGBT Center, which says they'll continue to fight for the rights of their communities, opening their doors for anyone with worry about what happened today.
I would ask folks to really think about just what it means to be a young person and to have access to team sports, the camaraderie, the ability to make those friendships, to just participate. I'm a person who very much benefited from playing on women's sports in Texas and found my community, and I think all people deserve that opportunity.
President Trump took to Truth Social on this one this morning as well, saying this is a big win and saying, quote, that SCOTUS just ruled against men playing in women's sports. That takes the ridiculous situation off the table. And yet it may be a new talking point for candidates going into the November election. We'll take it back to you.
All right, John, thank you so much. And it certainly will be. And for more context on these rulings, we want to bring in Justin Levitt, a constitutional law professor at Loyola Law School. Professor, first of all, thank you very much for joining us.
Great to be with you.
So let's begin with the transgender ban. What do you think, or why do you think the justices left it up to states on whether to ban transgender student athletes?
Well, the decision today was actually pretty narrow, and I think the context bears that out. What we're talking about here is a really small number of people, and in this case exemplified by a trans girl who'd taken puberty blockers and hormones, left her like all other girls wanting to play on the cross-country team. And the court today, as you just reported, said that states can make that decision whether that's permissible or not, but really confine their ruling to sports contexts in particular. And the disagreement between the majority and the dissent was all about, is a general program about what others might experience here enough, or does the state have to refine its criteria to deal with people really like the plaintiff in this particular case? California is going to continue to maintain protections so the girls can play sports on girls' teams and the boys can play sports on boys' teams. Other states may choose to do different things in the wake of today's opinion, but it's a very particular contextual decision.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, transgender athletes here in California will remain protected under state law. But could that change? I mean, could we see more legal challenges on a state level at some point?
I think you're certain to see more legal challenges, and both the majority and the dissent in today's case sort of forecast that, teed those decisions up for later. I don't know that the Supreme Court will get there, and I think that there'll be a really vigorous fight. You have to remember that these decisions are being made about real individuals, and the real individual stories matter. And when you know trans kids, whether they're trans girls or trans boys, they look and feel like girls and boys because they are girls and boys. And that makes a real difference in the context of legislators setting policy, and it makes a real difference in how the cases come out when they turn to the courts.
Professor, I want to talk about the ruling upholding birthright citizenship. Are you at all surprised by that decision?
I'm not at all surprised by the result. I'm quite surprised by the vote count. This should have been 9-0. It was clearly forecast it wasn't going to be, but a 5-4 decision on something as basic as this is a real item of note for how radically conservative this Supreme Court is. It's a good thing. It's unambiguously a good thing to reaffirm that if you're born in this country, you're a citizen no matter who your parents are. And that's effectively what the court decided today. But it shouldn't have taken a 5-4 majority to get there. That's something that we've had in the 14th Amendment since 1868. It's what America stands for. It's what the Statue of Liberty stands for. And the fact that the decision was as narrow as it was is quite a surprise.
All right. Professor Levitt from Loyola Law School, thank you so much for your time and your expertise. Appreciate it.
Of course.
All right. And we know there's a lot to digest here. NBC4 will have more reaction and another breakdown of the court's decision starting at 3. You can also read up on all of the court's decisions on the NBCLA app.